Well, welcome to my November Monarchy Canada talk, and the subject tonight is the future of the Commonwealth. Now, what got me thinking about this as an appropriate talk for this month was the November Commonwealth Heads of the Government meeting, which was held earlier this month in Sri Lanka. And there were three things that happened with that meeting, or more accurately, I would say there was one thing that happened and two things that didn't happen, which I thought was relevant to the question of the future of the Commonwealth. Now, the first thing that happened was the decision by the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Harper, not to attend the CHOGM meeting because of Sri Lanka's human rights record, in particular regarding the Tamils, and because it was being held in Sri Lanka, and that Sri Lanka would be the chairman of the Prime Minister's committee, or whatever they call it, for the 2-year period. Also, the government, the Canadian government, made the point that the government was reviewing Canadian funding for the Commonwealth. They did not say they were going to cancel it or reduce it, but they were reviewing it with the implication that they might cut back on the funding because of Sri Lanka's the participation or leadership for the next 2 years and how this would affect it. So that was the event that was happening in connection with this conference. Now, the two things that didn't happen, one was I didn't think there was a significant reaction in Canada. There was some news reports, and some people praised the Prime Minister, thought it was the right thing to do, to not go, and to not send the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I believe it was the Parliamentary Secretary who attended, so a lower level. So some people thought it was the right decision by the Prime Minister. Some people thought it was not the right decision, that along with most of the countries, I believe India did not attend the Prime Minister, and I think one other country may not have, the Prime Minister may not have attended, but the bulk of the Prime Minister's heads of government did go to the Commonwealth meeting. But what I thought was interesting was that I didn't find a lot of coverage. It got a little bit of mention in the newspaper, but there was the people who were critical of the Prime Minister, there was no great outrage. It was not raised that this was a terrible threat to the Commonwealth that he wasn't going, and the people who defended him were not really saying, how wonderful and spectacular. They just didn't get the attention, which made me wonder, was that a sign of indifference to the future of the Commonwealth itself, that people didn't really care. 30 years ago, I suspect that if the Prime Minister had decided on such a course of action not to attend a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting for a specific reason, not because he couldn't make it, but because of a policy decision, it would have had a bigger reaction in the Canadian among Canadian public. The third thing that didn't happen, and it may not have happened because it may never have been intended to happen, but there were rumors in the summer that the Queen wanted this meeting of the heads of government to address the question of whether or not the Prince of Wales would be the automatic successor to the Queen as head of the Commonwealth. Now, this was not officially announced that the Queen wanted that, but the rumors were out that the Queen wanted this discussed and decided, obviously settled, that yes, the Prince of Wales does automatically become head of the Commonwealth. Now, this question comes up because the Commonwealth Secretariat's position is that the headship of the Commonwealth is not a hereditary position that passes automatically to the Prince of Wales, but in fact will be decided by the heads of government of the Commonwealth countries at the time when Her Majesty does die, and whether or not it might be Charles, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Charles. Now, there are many people who disagree with that interpretation, including Professor Richard Toporowski, who has made an eloquent argument that the head of the Commonwealth title is in fact hereditary and passed from the King to the Queen, and thus does pass to the Prince of Wales. So that is disputed, but the official position of the Secretariat, as they put on the Commonwealth website, is that the Prince of Wales does not automatically become the head. Now, the question that I wondered was, if the rumors were true, it certainly was not discussed. It wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't in the communique, and I never heard, when I checked the results, that any that was ever discussed or addressed. Now, that may be because it's not true that the Queen asked that it be addressed at this meeting. The rumors may simply have been false, or it's possible that the Queen did want it, and the Commonwealth heads of government decided they didn't wish to discuss it and come up with a definitive position regarding the future of the Commonwealth, or specifically the Prince of Wales' role when he becomes king. Of course, the Prince of Wales did attend on behalf of Her Majesty this particular one, so he had a higher profile. So those were the three things that I thought came out of this meeting that are relevant to my talk tonight. The second of the three, the limited reaction, I thought, in Canada, might suggest indifference, which, if in fact that is an indication of indifference, may lead to a decline in the significance of the Commonwealth in the minds of Canadians. So that is something of concern. The other two questions, the reaction to Sri Lanka's position and the Queen's, whether or not the Queen raised the question of whether the Prince of Wales will automatically succeed as head of the Commonwealth, raises, I think, the question of what is the Commonwealth. Is it a club based on values, which the first point might suggest, or is it a family based on sentiment, which is where the question of the succession comes in? I will be addressing both of those later on in the talk. Having said that point as the starting aspect of this talk, I'll then go to the question of the title, The Future of the Commonwealth. Only a brave or reckless person tries to predict the future on anything. And as an example, Patrick Gordon Walker, who was a Labour Member of Parliament and a member of the cabinet of Clement Attlee's government in Britain in the late 40s and into the early 50s, he was first the Under Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations, and then the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations, in other words, the political cabinet minister responsible for the Commonwealth at the time of India's decision to become a republic, and the whole discussion over whether or not a republic could be in the Commonwealth, and the reshaping of the Commonwealth in the late 40s and early 50s. So he was one of the people who directed and created the milieu and the ideas as to how the Commonwealth was going forward. So he is someone one would assume had a pretty good grasp on the Commonwealth. About 50 years ago, 1962, this book came out on the Commonwealth, and it's an excellent book that he wrote, but in it he does make some predictions of the future. And I found it interesting that there were some points that he said he was not sure how the Commonwealth would develop. In those areas he was usually right, but there were 2 points that he was absolutely certain about, that the future of the Commonwealth could not go otherwise, and on both cases he was wrong. And those two concerned the question of, could a country that had not been part of the empire become part of the Commonwealth, and the question of South Africa, which had just left the Commonwealth a year before. And as to the first, he wrote that the Commonwealth is a natural and not an artificial unit. It is not the sort of association that could be joined by outside countries. And he goes on to explain that advocates of an expanding Commonwealth tend to imagine that all that is necessary for a foreign country to join the Commonwealth is a community of interest with the United Kingdom. No foreign country could conceivably have the shared history that underlines the cohesion of the Commonwealth, nor could it have sufficiently diverse and widespread relations with all the members of all kinds. And then on the question of South Africa, he says, for much the same reason, the deliberate severance of the Commonwealth connection, for instance in the case of South Africa, would probably constitute so sharp an interruption that the subtle links could never be restored. So the 2 points, he did not believe any country not part of the empire could ever join the Commonwealth, and that South Africa would not be readmitted. Now, we know the two recent countries who have come into the Commonwealth, Rwanda and Mozambique, had never been part of the British Empire. They were admitted because their neighbors, who were part of the Commonwealth, simply wanted them to be brought in to the Commonwealth because of their connections with them. And South Africa, after apartheid ended and Nelson Mandela became president, South Africa resumed its status within the Commonwealth. So there were two fundamental points to Patrick Walker, who was absolutely wrong in his prediction. And if anyone I would have thought would be right and be able to predict the future, he would have been one of those people. So therefore, it is very dangerous to try and predict the future, and I will therefore look to the refuge of history instead of the future for the rest of this talk. What I'm going to present is a review of the past and present of the Commonwealth and indicate what I think they suggest as options for the future. I'm not going to predict which option will be taken, but what the possible choices are for the Commonwealth going forward based on its history and present situation.